I read in a fascinating article earlier today on the Daily Maverick, and Tzvi Brivik is a lawyer with Malcolm Lyons. And Tzvi, good afternoon. You were arguing that tandem jumping it's not absolutely crystal clear whether tandem gliding for profit, in the sense that one of the people involved is making money out of it, is legal.
Thank you, John. Absolutely. It's not clear, and that's despite the body of legislation which exists around civil aviation, commercial flying, required to be an air carrier, and which are embodied in, as I say, acts, regulations, standards, manuals, codes of conduct, and yet none of them comes out clearly to say precisely what is needed. The best that we could ascertain was that you would require a rating or a membership from a school and some sort of an approval from that same school and a carrier license. But at the time when we ran our case, which I wrote about in this morning's article, which came before a judge in 2013 and the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2015, none of those were in place and weren't being distributed to the pilots who were flying for commercial gain. And both of those courts came to the same conclusion, that the activity of taking money from a passenger, in other words, flying for reward, would be considered to be illegal. And it's for that reason that we actually pursued the claim against the organizations that purportedly are out there to regulate the industry and protect passengers from incidents such as the one you spoke of, and the one that our client was involved in as far back as 2004.
But I mean, if this was before the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2015, that's 8 years ago. There's been plenty of time for the necessary procedures to be put in place. You're suggesting that they haven't been.
So what has happened since is that the South African Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association instituted or arranged for the various training organizations or schools, they call them aviation training organizations. These have subsequently been taken over by the Civil Aviation Authority, which is a government organization, and its job is to regulate air activity, so all the way from jumbo jets down to wind-assisted devices such as paragliders and hang gliders. And they're meant to be running these schools and also ensuring that the pilots that provide these services are rated. And I did prior to writing the article, I went online and I looked at some of these various organizations which offer the service in and around the peninsula. And we're talking about all the way from Porterville to the jump that you did off Signal Hill. And we could find only one provider that actually indicated that they had this mandatory qualification and license. And it's not that I'm railing against the industry. I think it provides an incredible added attraction to what is a magnificent and beautiful city and to the peninsula. What I am trying to ensure is that it is adequately regulated, and that not only that the pilots are properly trained and supervised, but also that there's general insurance, which there's no regulation or provision which compels the pilots to carry.
We will be trying to get hold of one of the organizations involved with this to respond to your article and to the conversation that you and I are now having. But the fact that only one site that you visited, one service provider, claims to have the necessary permissions doesn't mean that the others don't. It just, potentially it means that they have it, but they haven't thought it necessary to include it in their marketing of the service they
Absolutely offer. Right. It could be that they have it and they haven't provided it in their marketing. But our case at Supreme Court of Appeal ran along the lines that there should be an organization that oversees this activity. In other words, when you get to Signal Hill and you're about to take the jump and you're a tourist who's just landed 2 or 3 days ago in the country, you should have the comfort to know that the pilot has been audited or checked, or there's been some sort of a random assessment of who's jumping off Signal Hill and whether or not they meet the criteria. So that when you do the jump, and it is an extreme sport, and as an extreme sport, it carries its risks, as we all know, and that actually was raised as a defense in our matter. But it is an extreme sport with risks, but you should still know that the pilot has been vetted and that as many of the risks which can be mitigated against and the risks that can be foreseen have been dealt with and in terms of regulation. and that the safety, the safety of the passenger, which is paramount, assured.
What are the implications if I jump, or somebody's just told me that skydivers jump, paragliders fly, so I'll try and use the correct terminology. What happens if I fly with somebody who isn't properly accredited in the ways that you've described as being necessary legally, and something goes wrong? What are the implications for me of that?
I'm going to speak just to the civil implications, in other words, from a claim which the passenger can make for damages. So you were very fortunate in that your fall was from 2 meters, but our client in 2004, when the wing collapsed, smashed into the side of Signal Hill. She had put her legs out, she hadn't been warned against it, and was rendered a paraplegic. So you can imagine that, even as you say, the incidences may be far between. The consequences of those incidences are devastating. So they should have a claim to recover those damages, and we would refer to it as a delictual claim in law against the wrongdoer. And you would have to allege that obviously the pilot flew and it wasn't safe to do so, but also that if there was no oversight, that they should not have been offering for award that activity. And so it should be another, at least, arrow in your arsenal in pursuing a claim on behalf of a terribly injured passenger for damages. So there's a delictual claim for a civil delictual claim, and then in addition you should be able to say that, well, where was the South African Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association? Where were various inspectors from the Civil Aviation Authority, and why weren't they ensuring that this pilot, who may or may not have been accredited, was not taking passengers and plying his trade on unsuspecting passengers?
Thank you very much. We will get the organisation to respond. Tzvi Brivik chatting to us there with the law firm Malcolm Lyons.
Afternoon Drive with John Maytham
on CapeTalk.